Look up. Beyond the clouds, beyond the atmosphere, lies a vacuum of infinite silence. For millennia, humanity looked at the stars and saw gods, navigators, and dreams. But in the middle of the 20th century, two superpowers looked up and saw something very different: a battlefield. Welcome to the ultimate arena of the Cold War. Between 1955 and 1975, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a contest that was about far more than just planting flags or gathering rocks. It was a battle for ideological supremacy, fought through technological fire. In this episode, we are going to tear apart the history of the space race. We aren't just talking about rockets. We are talking about national survival. The stakes were absolute: national security, global prestige, and the terrifying military advantage of the high ground. It was a 20-year argument to prove which system, capitalism or communism, could take humanity to the stars. This is the story of how we left our planet to save our pride. The world changed on October 4th, 1957. On that autumn day, the Soviet Union launched a polished metal sphere, no bigger than a beach ball, into low Earth orbit. Its name was Sputnik 1. It didn't have cameras or complex sensors. It simply circled the globe every 96 minutes, emitting a rhythmic beep 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 that could be heard by amateur radio operators all over America. That sound shattered American confidence. Until that moment, the United States believed it was the unquestioned technological leader of the world. Suddenly, a communist nation, recovering from a devastating war, had beaten them to the punch. But the fear wasn't just about pride, it was about survival. This created the terrifying realization of a missile gap. The logic was simple and horrifying. If the Soviets could launch a satellite into orbit, they could launch a nuclear warhead to New York. Sputnik wasn't just a scientific marvel. It was a threat that circled the heads of every American 16 times a day. The American response to Sputnik was initially a disaster. The U.S. Navy attempted to launch their own satellite with the Vanguard rocket. It rose a few feet, fell back down, and exploded on live television. The world laughed. The press called it Kaputnik and Flopnik. It was a humiliation on the global stage. But America has a history of responding to failure with overwhelming force. By January 1958, the U.S. Army finally succeeded with the launch of Explorer 1. Crucially, this mission did actual science. It discovered the Van Allen radiation belts, proving that American capability was real. The government then turned its eyes to the future. They realized this wasn't just a rocket problem, it was a brain problem. In 1958, they passed the National Defense Education Act, pouring massive funding into science and mathematics programs. They were literally trying to buy a smarter generation. And to organize the chaos, they consolidated all military and civilian space efforts under one powerful new agency, NASA. The disorganized scramble was over. The race was on. While America was reorganizing, the Soviet Union was sprinting. They weren't interested in second place. They wanted to own the milestones. Just a month after Sputnik 1, in November 1957, they launched Sputnik 2. But this time, the payload wasn't a radio transmitter. It was a living creature, a dog named Laika. This proved that living organisms could survive the G-forces of launch and the weightlessness of orbit. Though, tragically, Laika did not survive the flight. Then they set their sights on the moon. In 1959, the Luna program scored a massive victory. Their probe became the first human-made object to impact the moon's surface. Even more impressively, they captured photographs of the mysterious far side of the moon, a face of our neighbor that humanity had never seen before. The Soviets were painting the cosmos red, and the West was just watching from the ground. If Sputnik was a jab, April 12, 1961 was a knockout punch. On that morning, a farm boy turned pilot named Yuri Gagarin climbed into the Vostok 1 capsule. With a roar that shook the steppes of Kazakhstan, he blasted off. He didn't just go up and down, he completed one full orbit of the Earth. For 108 minutes, a Soviet citizen looked down on the entire world. It was a devastating blow to American morale. The Soviets hadn't just put a machine in space, they had put a man there. Gagarin instantly became a global icon. His smile was plastered on newspapers from London to Tokyo. He became the human face of Soviet technological superiority. The message was implicit but clear. The Soviet system produces heroes. The American system produces exploding rockets. America needed heroes, and it needed them fast. Enter Project Mercury. NASA introduced the Mercury 7 astronauts to the world. They were test pilots, brave, handsome, and wholesome. They were packaged as all-American heroes representing courage, skill, and national pride. In May 1961, just weeks after Gagarin, Alan Shepard became the first American in space aboard Freedom 7. It was a short, suborbital flight, essentially a cannonball shot into space and back, but it proved America was in the game. Then, in February 1962, John Glenn took the next step. He became the first American to actually orbit the Earth. His flight restored confidence in the American space program. The gap was still there, but it was closing. The United States had proven it could match the Soviet Union man for man, if not yet rocket for rocket. In 1961, the United States was technically behind in every metric of spaceflight. Yet on May 25th, President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress and made one of the most audacious gambles in political history. He declared, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth." Think about the context. When Kennedy said these words, America had only sent a man into space for 15 minutes. They had no rockets capable of reaching the moon, no spacesuits for walking on it, and no idea how to land. It was a strategic gamble of immense proportions. Kennedy was betting the entire prestige of the nation on a finish line that was 240,000 miles away. To get from a single man in orbit to a lunar landing, NASA needed to learn how to actually work in space. This bridge was called Project Gemini. Gemini was the classroom where NASA learned the trade. They launched 2 astronaut crews to test long-duration spaceflight, bridging the gap between the simple Mercury capsules and the complex Apollo missions. They mastered critical skills. They learned orbital rendezvous, the art of finding another ship in the vastness of space and docking with it. Without this, a moon landing was impossible. And they stepped outside. During Gemini 4, Ed White performed the first American extravehicular activity, or EVA. Floating against the blue backdrop of Earth, tethered only by a gold cord, White proved that humans could leave the safety of their ship and survive in the void. While America was methodically learning with Gemini, the Soviets were taking dangerous shortcuts to maintain the illusion of dominance. This led to the Voskhod program. In 1964, they launched Voskhod 1. It was the first multi-person crew, but it was essentially a propaganda stunt. They took a capsule designed for one person and crammed 3 cosmonauts inside. It was so tight they couldn't even wear spacesuits. It prioritized headlines over safety. In 1965, they scored another first with Voskhod 2. Alexei Leonov performed the first ever spacewalk. It looked triumphant on film, but in reality, it was a near disaster. His suit inflated so much in the vacuum that he couldn't fit back through the hatch. He had to manually bleed out his oxygen to squeeze back in. They were risking lives for prestige, pushing their luck to the breaking point. By the mid-1960s, the American industrial giant had fully awakened. Project Apollo was no longer just a dream. It was the most ambitious engineering project ever attempted. It involved a staggering 400,000 people, from seamstresses sewing spacesuits to engineers coding guidance computers. It utilized 20,000 industrial firms across the country. At the heart of this beast was the Saturn V rocket, designed by Wernher von Braun. It remains the most powerful machine ever built by humanity. It was a skyscraper filled with explosive fuel, designed to throw 100,000 pounds toward the moon. The scale was almost biblical. America wasn't just building a rocket. They were building a pyramid to the stars. But in the rush to beat the clock, tragedy struck. On January 27, 1967, the space race claimed its first American casualties on the ground. During a routine launchpad test for Apollo 1, a spark ignited inside the command module. Because the cabin was pressurized with pure oxygen, the fire spread instantly. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were trapped. They died within seconds. The disaster ground the program to a halt. For 18 months, nothing flew. Engineers tore apart the design, and we built the command module from scratch. It was a somber reminder of the extreme dangers involved. The moon would not be won easily, and the cost would be measured in human lives. While NASA rebuilt from the ashes of Apollo 1, the Soviet moon program was imploding in secret. Their answer to the Saturn V was the N-1 rocket. But unlike the American effort, the Soviet program was rushed, underfunded, and plagued by internal rivalries. The N-1 had 30 engines on its first stage alone, a plumbing nightmare of epic proportions. The results were catastrophic. Between 1969 and 1972, they attempted 4 uncrewed test launches. All 4 ended in massive explosions. One of them was one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history, obliterating the launch pad. With the N-1 failure, Soviet lunar landing hopes were effectively destroyed. The race was becoming a one-horse sprint. By late 1968, NASA made a bold decision that changed history. Intelligence suggested the Soviets might try a lunar flyby, so NASA decided to skip a few steps. They sent Apollo 8 all the way to the moon without a lunar lander. In December 1968, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders became the first humans to leave Earth's gravity well. On Christmas Eve, as they orbited the moon, they looked back. They saw the Earth, a fragile blue marble hanging in the black void. They snapped the famous Earthrise photograph, which forever changed humanity's perspective of our planet. During a live broadcast watched by millions, the crew read from the book of Genesis. In a year defined by war and riots, it was a moment of pure peace. A Christmas miracle beamed from 240,000 miles away. Before the final landing, everything had to be tested. Apollo 9 and Apollo 10 were the ultimate dress rehearsals. Apollo 9 stayed in Earth orbit, but it had a crucial job: testing the lunar module, or LM. It looked like a spider, but it had to fly. The crew proved that the delicate craft could maneuver in the vacuum of space. Then came Apollo 10. This was a full dry run. The crew flew all the way to the moon and descended in the lander to within 50,000 feet of the surface. They were so close they could see the boulders, but they didn't land. They fired their engines and climbed back up. It took incredible discipline to come that close to history and turn back, but safety was paramount. The stage was now set for the main event. July 20th, 1969. The lunar module Eagle begins its descent. Inside are Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. But the computer is screaming. Yellow alarms, 1202 and 1201, are flashing. The guidance computer is overloading with data. Mission Control has to make a split-second decision: abort or continue. The guidance officer, Steve Bales, gives the call. Go. But the drama isn't over. Armstrong looks out the window and sees that the computer is steering them into a field of massive boulders. If they land there, they die. Armstrong takes manual control. He flies the lander like a helicopter, skimming over the surface, looking for a flat spot. The fuel gauge is dropping. 60 seconds, 30 seconds. The engine kicks up dust. Contact light. Engine stop. The radio crackles. Neil Armstrong's voice comes through. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. 6 hours later, a ghostly black and white image beams to 650 million television sets around the world. A bulky figure descends a ladder. Armstrong steps off the pad and speaks the words that will echo for eternity. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. In that moment, the Cold War paused. It wasn't an American achievement anymore. It was a human one. We had broken the chains of our home world. Humanity's greatest achievement was complete. We often focus on Apollo 11, but the subsequent missions, Apollo 12 through 17, were where the real work began. The focus shifted from survival to science. Astronauts became geologists. They gathered hundreds of pounds of moon rocks that would help us understand the origins of the solar system. There was drama, too. Apollo 13 became a successful failure when an oxygen tank exploded halfway to the moon. The world held its breath as the crew used the lunar module as a lifeboat to limp home. By the later missions, they were bringing cars. The lunar rover allowed astronauts to drive miles across the surface. We weren't just visiting anymore. We were exploring. The space race began with fear, but it ended with a handshake. By 1975, the political climate had changed. The era of détente, a thawing of tensions, had arrived. The superpowers decided to replace competition with cooperation. This led to the Apollo-Soyuz test project. An American Apollo module docked with a Soviet Soyuz capsule in orbit. When the hatches opened, American astronaut Tom Stafford shook the hand of Alexei Leonov, the same man who had risked his life on the first spacewalk years earlier. This symbolic end marked the conclusion of the intense superpower competition that defined a generation. The race was officially over. Why does this matter today? Because the world you live in was built by the space race. The race for the moon triggered a computing revolution. The guidance computer on Apollo required small, lightweight, powerful processors. This need accelerated the development of the microchip. The civilian spin-offs are everywhere. Cordless power tools were developed for astronauts to use on the moon. Memory foam was created for crash protection. Even CAT scan technology used in hospitals traces its roots to space imaging. The space race didn't just give us moon rocks, it gave us the modern world. As we look back at those 20 explosive years, the legacy is undeniable. The space race transformed society. It sparked a revolution in STEM education, pouring money into science and engineering that is still paying dividends today. It inspired an entire generation to look at the sky and ask, what if? It also demonstrated the power of industrial policy. It showed what a nation can do when it mobilizes every resource for a single goal. And geopolitically, it solidified the United States as the world's technological superpower. The space race was born of war and fear, but it matured into humanity's greatest adventure. It proved that when we are pushed to the brink, we don't just survive, we soar.